Sophie Glenn here. Now we're talking about the disc sander and the spindle sander. This is technically called an oscillating spindle sander, but I'll get to that in just a second. So these two machines happen to be one machine, so it's a combo of a disc sander and a spindle sander. But more often than not, you might come across these as two separate machines. So the purposes for this video, I'll be talking about them both in the same, in this same video, but I'll do one and then the other. So we'll start with the disc sander first, and the sander is what you would think it would be. It sands down edges and it sands down sides, and it can help create whatever shape that you need to. So the disc sander is great for concave surfaces, so if you have outside curves or if you're trying to get a flat end on here or any kind of other flat area on a smaller piece. This is not the best demo, but it'll work for my purposes. So the spindle sander, or sorry, the disc sander is great for that. A couple of safety things you need to keep in mind with this. I have my safety glasses on. I also have my earmuffs. It's not a particularly loud machine, but again, if you're working amongst a group of other people and they're all using machines and the dust collection's on, it's always nice to kind of have the earmuffs handy in case it does get really loud. And as you might imagine, this does accumulate a lot of dust. So you might want to wear a dust mask if you're sensitive to that, and you definitely want to have the dust collection on for when you're working on here. A couple other things as well. The disc sander in particular, you won't be able to see it here, but there's actually a set of arrows on here, so they're spinning this way. So in this instance, it's going counterclockwise, so it's spinning this way. So with that in mind, I only want to use the left side of this sander. So from the center all the way to the left is where I want to use it. So to give you an example, since this is going this way, if I use the right side of the sander, it'll just want to pull my piece of wood up, and it could potentially make it go flying, and we don't want that to happen. So if I use only the left side of the machine, then it's going to keep that piece of wood nice and flush up against this table, and I don't really have to worry about it flying across the room, right? So we always want to stay safe in that respect. Another thing on here, a tendency for some students might be to wear gloves on here because the wood can get hot, especially if you're doing a lot of sanding, and we absolutely do not want to wear gloves on this machine. And the reason for that is because gloves can get caught, especially in these little gaps between the sander and the table. And if a glove gets caught, that means your finger's going to get caught, so we don't want to do that. Usually reaction time, if you do happen to graze your finger, you will pull back pretty quickly, so that's why I typically do not wear gloves on this. But just generally speaking, you don't want to wear any kind of gloves on this machine. All right, a couple other things to mention on here. We talked about the miter gauge on the bandsaw already. You can also use it on the spindle sander, or disc sander. This is the disc sander, that's the spindle sander, okay. So you use it on the disc sander. So this table also has a nice channel in it for this miter gauge to write on. So if you cut a 45 on the bandsaw and you want to get it just right at 45, or get it nice and sanded at 45, you could set this up to 45, which I'll do here. All right, it's right around there. And I can use my straight end up against here and then sand that accordingly. So I don't want to take this giant chunk off, right? So I should already have this at a 45 already. So you don't want to try to sand all this junk off. If you can cut it off, then that'd be great. So generally speaking, if you want to cut something down on the bandsaw first or whatever machine first, and then you want to just lightly sand the rest down on the disc sander. Okay. So yeah, I actually have another piece here. So I can actually, so this was cut on the compound miter saw, so I could actually move this up against here. This is a little small for this, but just so you get an idea, this will be just fine. And just like the bandsaw, I can also just put a piece of double stick tape, a flat piece of wood on here, so I can extend this this face here. So if I have a small piece like this, then I can just use that up against there. All right. All right. So I'll move this aside for just a second. Another nice thing about this is I can also tilt this bed if I want to, right? So if I'm working on here and I need to sand this way, what I can do is I can unlock this here, and you might not be able to see it in the video, but there is actually a gauge down here, but then I can actually push this table down, right? So I can sand that angle down if I wanted to, right? So that's got quite a bit of ways to go, but you get the idea of that. With that said, you always want to set this back up to 90 for the next person. So to do that, I can take my speed square here, or a nice combination square, and make sure that's just right at 90 degrees. So push this back a little bit, I'll lift this up. You shouldn't see any light in between the sanding disc and the speed square or your combination square. So right there is pretty good. And I just lock that back into place. Okay. So another thing to mention too is that after a while, if this gets a lot of prolonged use, it'll start to get really gummed up. So right now it's in decent shape, but if you start seeing like little burn marks in it, or if you're like little patches of glue, because some kids will tend to want to sand wet glue on here, which I don't like. So if that's the case, then it'll need to be changed out. So you'll want to get your shop tech, or myself in this case, to change it out for you. So just keep that in mind when you're sanding. With that too, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on this thing, because this is a sanding disc, and I think this is maybe a 60 grit, I think, or maybe an 80 grit. So it's pretty aggressive, so you don't actually need to like force your piece of wood into it. You can actually let the sanding disc do its job. So you can just very lightly hold this piece of wood up to it, and it will sand away, right? So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. And just to demonstrate, I'll just put a nice little rounded corner on this edge here. I'll move this piece of wood out of the way. So I get my dust collection on and my earmuffs on. I want to make sure that the gate is open for dust collection. Switch it on. Again, I'm only using the left side of the sand. I'm also aware of where my fingers are, so I'm not having my hands on it. Okay. Nice rounded corners on there. Okay. So that's pretty much the disc sander, not the spindle sander. If this does start to get like really dusty, what you could take is just, there's little rubber bars that come with spindle sanders usually, and you can just use that little rubber bar to help clean the sanding disc off. Usually that's a job for the shop tech, but if you're well acquainted with the wood shop area, then you could use that too. And you would use it pretty much the same as you would a piece of wood, just only on the left side of the sanding disc. All right. So that's pretty much the disc sander. So now I'll skip over to the spindle sander here. Okay. So this guy is a spindle sander. So as you probably noticed, when I turned this guy on, it also turned on the spindle sander. And it basically just goes up and down and then spins in place, right? That's pretty much all it does. So it's spinning, in this case, it's spinning clockwise. So what's nice about this, so if you remember my piece from earlier, I got these little marks from where I made my relief cuts. So if I wanted to sand those down and actually sand it to my sort of rough line here, then I can actually use the spindle sander to get those convex curves, which is really great. So here, you can also tilt the bed on here. So this will tilt forward this way by using the same method. So it's also got a gauge on here. So I could do that. And these also come in different diameters. So I have a really monster one here. Right, so these are just two examples. So here's the biggest one we have here, and then a skinnier one here. Not the skinniest we have, but a skinnier one. So depending on whatever diameter or radius that you're trying to sand down, you can choose one of these that best fits your diameter, right? To switch these out, It's basically just 2 wrenches under here, but that's a job reserved for the shop techs or myself. So if you need it changed out, just let one of them know or myself know. But usually they all live back here. And when it does get changed out, you always want to make sure that you change out the throat plate too. So the throat plate is here basically so your piece of wood doesn't get caught into the machine, right? So the throat plate basically extends this table surface so that it creates, so you don't lose any of your pieces going in here. So depending on the diameter spindle that you're using in here, you might need the little itty bitty skinny guy. We have a big thick one, and this is kind of an oval shape to account for the tilt of the bed. So if you are tilting the bed, this will account for that. Same thing with this guy here, right? So that's why these are an oval shape. So you need to switch those out when you switch out, or when the spindle itself gets switched out, all right? So because this is a joint machine, you always want to be careful if someone else is working on this side while someone else is working here. Or just be aware that they're both going to come on at the same time. So if someone's surrounding you, just to make sure that you're not distracted, and just be mindful of that pretty much. So here what's nice is I can work this from all sorts of different angles, right? So I can be up front here. For the purposes of the demo, I'm over here, right? And I can also be back here if I needed to. So that's kind of the nice thing about this machine, because it spins in place and the table goes all the way around the surface. I can use that whole table surface there. All right, so I'll go ahead, and this is not the right diameter, but again, for the sake of the demo, I'll use it for this. I'll go ahead and clean that up, and again, you'll want the dust collection on. So it's spinning, the way I'm standing, it's spinning clockwise, so I want to work against that, right? So I'm going to start with here. In either direction. If I work against them, that's going to work a little bit harder. Just so you know, see, I got a little burn mark here that I want to get out. I just got it out. Great. You can start to see that it's already getting nice and smooth in there. So I'll try to get these little nicks out there. I got those little nicks out. Pretty straightforward. So that's the disc sander and the spindle sander.